Learn Japanese history.
We are your navigators, Taro and Hanako.
Welcome. If you're just starting out with Japanese history, you're in the right place. Today, we're tackling a huge moment, the Meiji Restoration.
Yeah, it's really pivotal. Think of it as Japan hitting the fast forward button on modernization.
Exactly. We'll look at how they kind of soaked up Western ideas and tech and, what that meant for people and the country itself.
It's basically the origin story of modern Japan we're diving into.
Okay, so kicking things off in the early Meiji era, there's this key phrase, Bunmei Kaika, civilization and enlightenment. Sounds pretty grand.
It really was. Bunmei Kaika wasn't just a slogan. It was this government-led drive to adopt Western systems, culture, everything.
Right, not just copying, but a strategic move.
Definitely. They wanted to quickly bring Japan up to speed, become a modern nation on the world stage. There was a real sense of urgency.
And some key thinkers were driving this, weren't they? People like Fukuzawa Yukichi.
Keta Hiroyuki. Absolutely crucial figures. They were writing, lecturing, basically introducing all sorts of Western knowledge and ideas.
Like what kind of ideas?
Well, things like individual freedom, rights, personal independence. Fukuzawa, for instance, was big on social reform, Western thought.
And Kato?
Kato Hiroyuki. He focused more on Western political systems, helping people understand how they worked.
Fukuzawa's book, An Encouragement of Learning, that really took off, didn't it? What was the main message there?
Hugely influential. A core idea was that people aren't just born into a fixed social class. That was radical then.
So education could change your station in life.
Exactly. Fukuzawa argued that by learning, you could break free from those old feudal structures. And he linked it directly. Individual independence leads to national independence.
That's powerful. A strong nation needs strong individuals. And his other work, An Outline of a Theory of Civilization.
Yeah, in that one, he basically argued that civilization progresses through human intellect and virtue advancing.
So becoming more civilized meant becoming smarter and more virtuous, essentially.
Pretty much. And that idea really clicked with young people who were eager for Japan to progress and, catch up with the West.
But how did these ideas actually get out there? I mean, it's one thing to write a book.
Good question. Technology played a huge role here, specifically printing technology.
Oh, okay.
There was this guy, Motoki Shozo. He figured out lead movable typecasting.
Right, movable type. Like Gutenberg, but in Japan.
Sort of, yeah. The key thing was it made printing way faster and cheaper than, say, woodblock printing.
So you could suddenly print lots of stuff.
Exactly. Mass publication became possible. That's how you get newspapers like the Yokohama Mainichi Shimbun starting up and Fukuzawa's books selling like hotcakes.
So this tech advancement was crucial for spreading these Enlightenment ideas quickly.
Absolutely critical. It fueled a national conversation about modernization like never before.
Okay, so the intellectual groundwork is being laid. The government must have realized they needed an educated populace for this modern state, right?
Definitely. They saw the link. National strength needs educated people. So they looked west, particularly at Western school systems.
And that led to the Gakusei, the education system order.
Yes, in 1872. That established a formal nationwide education system.
And suddenly schools everywhere. I read something like 20,000 elementary schools popped up pretty fast.
It was an incredible number, a massive undertaking. But it's worth remembering they weren't starting entirely from scratch.
Oh, how so?
Well, the Edo period had Terracotta temple schools. They provided basic literacy, numeracy. So people were already kind of used to the idea of schooling outside the home.
Ah, right. So there was some foundation.
Yeah.
But this compulsory education idea, it wasn't popular everywhere, was it? Especially out in the country.
No, not at all. There was significant resistance. In rural areas, kids were needed for farm work,
Sending them to school meant losing labor.
Exactly. Plus, there were tuition fees and costs for building the schools. It hit farming families hard.
So hard that people actually protested.
Yes, there were even farmer uprisings demanding they get rid of the elementary schools. It shows that tension between the government's grand plan and people's daily reality.
Wow. So what did these early schools actually look like?
They were often built in this interesting style called yufu, Japanese carpenters using traditional wood techniques, but copying Western designs.
So like wooden buildings, but with Western-style windows.
Yeah, big windows for light, and sometimes unique features, like the Kaichi school had this octagonal tower. Very distinctive. You can see pictures from the time, classrooms with kids learning in these new spaces.
A real visual mix of old and new. Okay, so education's changing. What about other aspects of daily life, like how people looked or what they ate?
Big changes there, too. For men, the traditional top-knot hairstyle, the chanmage, started disappearing.
Replaced by
Western-style haircuts, Sangiriatama they called them, short hair,
that.
and Western clothes started appearing more, especially in cities or for government folks.
And food. I heard that changed too.
Yeah, eating meat, especially beef and pork, became more common. It wasn't really a big part of the diet before, for various reasons.
Interesting. And the cities themselves started looking different.
Oh, yeah. Brick buildings started going up in places like Tokyo. Oil lamps became common in homes much brighter than before.
So if you walk down a street in, say, Ginza,
You'd see gas lamps lighting the streets at night, maybe horse-drawn carriages, and definitely the jinrikisha, the rickshaw.
the rickshaw, that was invented then.
Yep, by Zumiyoso. Became a real symbol of the era. The whole street scene was changing fast.
And even telling time changed. That seems fundamental.
It really was. They switched from the old lunar solar calendar to the Western solar calendar, Gregorian calendar.
When did that happen?
Happened quite suddenly, actually. December 3rd, 1872 just became January 1st, 1873.
Whoa, just like that. Must have been quite an adjustment.
Absolutely. Think about festivals, agricultural cycles, everything had to shift.
But this waves of Western stuff,
Yeah.
it wasn't watching over the whole country evenly, was it?
No, that's really important. It was heavily concentrated in the big cities, port towns, government offices, schools, the army.
So out in the countryside.
Much slower change. Traditional customs often held on. People still use the lunar calendar for local festivals and things. A real urban-rural divide.
Right, so this rush towards the West.
Mm,
Were there any downsides, any negative reactions?
definitely. There was a kind of backlash against traditional Japanese culture in some quarters. People got so caught up in modernization that they started thinking anything old was bad.
Seriously? Like devaluing their own heritage?
Sadly, yes. You had cases of valuable cultural artifacts, temples, art being sold off cheap or even destroyed because they were seen as outdated or, uncivilized.
That's shocking. I think I read about a 5-story pagoda in Nara being sold for practically nothing.
Exactly that kind of thing, sold for just 25 yen. It really shows how extreme that mindset could get.
Were outsiders noticing this?
They were. There was a German doctor, Erwin Beltz, who lived in Japan then. He wrote about how some educated Japanese seemed almost ashamed of their own traditions, calling old things barbaric.
What a complicated time.
Right.
Progress, but also maybe losing something valuable.
Okay, let's shift to religion. That was also in flux, right?
Very much so. The new Meiji government initially tried hard to make Shinto the national religion.
Why? What was the goal?
To unify the country, really. Create a strong national identity centered on the emperor. This led them to issue the separation of Shinto and Buddhism, Order Shinbutsu Bunri.
Separating Shinto and Buddhism, weren't they often kind of mixed together before?
They often were, yeah. So this order caused massive disruption, and it triggered this anti-Buddhist movement called Haibutsu Kishaku.
Anti-Buddhist, what did that involve?
It was pretty intense. Temples were destroyed, statues smashed, scriptures burned, sometimes led by Shinto priests. A really difficult period for Buddhism.
Sounds awful. Was there more effort to promote Shinto?
Yes, the government issued the Great Promulgation Doctrine, Taikyo Senpu, in 1870. What was that about?
It was basically another push to establish Shinto as the state ideology. They set up a national shrine system, created new national holidays centered on the emperor.
Replacing older festivals.
Right. Things like the 5 seasonal festivals, the Goseku, were pushed aside for new ones like the Emperor's Birthday, Tenchosetsu, and National Foundation Day, Kigensetsu.
Trying to really cement that link between Shinto, the emperor, and the nation. Did it work? Did Shinto become the state religion?
Not entirely, no. It definitely gained prominence and state backing, but it didn't completely erase other beliefs. And then there was the whole issue with Christianity.
Ah, yes, the ban from the Edo period. Did the Meiji government keep that?
Initially, yes, and they enforced it. Christians, especially around Nagasaki, Inurakami, and the Goto Islands, faced persecution, arrests, imprisonment.
But didn't that cause problems internationally?
It did. Foreign governments protested against this persecution, and that pressure worked. In 1873, the ban on Christianity was finally lifted.
A big moment. So after 1873,
Missionaries, both Catholic and Protestant, who'd sort of been around but restricted, could now operate much more freely.
so missionary activity increased.
Significantly, they expanded their activities, and Christian communities began to grow more openly in Japan.
So wrapping this up, it really was just a period of incredible rapid change. Japan was actively remaking itself.
Absolutely. And not just on the surface with technology, but fundamentally in how people thought about, well, everything themselves, society, the world.
Yeah, just think about it. How you dressed, ate, learned, even kept track of the date it was all being reevaluated, often replaced with Western ways.
But as we saw, it wasn't always smooth. There was resistance, tension, this urban-rural gap.
Right. It shows a nation really wrestling with modernity,
Right.
trying to find its footing internationally while also figuring out what to do with its own traditions.
Exactly. And it's fascinating because those choices, those tensions from the early Meiji period, you can still see their echoes in Japan today.
That balance between tradition and modernity is still a huge theme, isn't it? It makes you wonder, what parts of this rapid transformation back then had the most lasting impact? And do you see parallels in other countries that went through similar periods of intense change?
That's definitely something to think about as you continue exploring Japanese history.